Brothers of the Serpent podcast, when you just need to talk about pyramids.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Everest Plateau. We are gonna do something a little different this time, just a bit. For this first segment here, we are going to, what? Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
We're going to talk about a good friend of ours who passed away recently. He was, we talked about him actually. He was the one that invited us out to go map the cave on his property. And he invited us out there several times to go look for arrowheads, and he was just an awesome guy.
And a party.
Yes, many parties. Many parties we went with him, but he recently passed away, and we just kind of wanted to give a shout out to him because he was just such a good person, such a great guy. So
Yeah.
You got some stories?
Yeah. We have a lot of mutual friends. His name is Booker Davenport.
Yeah.
And one of my closer friends was really close friends with him, and kind of got introduced us, and he was the reason you brought out to his first birthday party, which he used to throw out on his family's ranch.
Yeah.
And we were just blown away by the ranch. Obviously the next morning,
Yeah.
we could see it. I remember asking him long ago, like, "Oh, dude, are there any Indian mounds out here? There's got to be." And he's like, "I don't know, And another time that we went, I asked him if I could go exploring the place and looking for him, and I eventually found a site that I believed would have been Indian midden, and there were small artifacts, bird points and stuff
Just
lying on the surface.
Yeah.
And it looked like it might have been Indian midden, so I brought back what I had found, and he gave me 2 of them. I was basically giving them to him, and he's like, no, take the ones you want. He was real generous, and I told him the exact location of where I had found them, and I was like, dude, you gotta go over there and get on your hands and knees and crawl around, and once you find one of these, you will be hooked forever. And we saw each other. We live in a small town, so we saw each other here and there. He moved around a bit, and years went by. We went to some birthday parties, and saw each other at some festivals. And after we started the podcast, it was somewhere. It was like a couple episodes before we did the one with Clint back then.
Yeah.
Off the Arrowhead Dig.
Like in the late 50s.
Yeah, I just get his phone call, and I answer it, and it's Booker, and he's like, dude, I've been listening to the podcast, holy shit. And he just goes on to tell me that, he took my advice, and he went to the spot, and he found an arrowhead, and he was totally hooked ever since. And he had been exploring the whole property, and that's what kind of sparked the new sort of Snake Bros relationship that we had with him more recently.
Yeah.
Where we were spending more frequent time together, specifically dedicated to discovering ancient secrets together out on his ranch. And he took us out there, he showed us everything, and like right when we got there, we get to his house, and his whole porch, like the railing all the way around the porch, and the table inside it, completely covered in like artifact fragments and worked flint and fossils and everything. Yeah, and Russ was just laughing like, dude, you are totally a snake bro. You got it bad. You got it bad. You got it real bad. Oh, and it was so much fun, and we just wanted to say a few words and to thank him posthumously for including us in the discoveries out on his ranch, and it was a great time. So thank you, Booker.
Yeah, I also had a sort of an online. Booker and I would communicate online every once in a while through various mediums because we were both kind of into the same old school progressive disco house techno, right? I DJ'd for a while, and he would always like send me these random messages being like, oh man, this DJ is badass. Like, you're the only guy who knows these people, dude. And like, so we would talk about, these like, cause I would be like, oh yeah, I got all that guy's records, right? And he was like, holy shit, bro. So we would communicate like that, and he was real cool, like always fun to talk to. The dude was hilarious and like had a great sense of humor. And he never got to meet the Watcher, Brett. He never got to meet him. Sadly, they never met. But this will give you guys an idea of his sense of humor. So when we went out there after he called us Snake Bros, this will give you an idea of his sense of humor. He was like, he's like, yeah, man, I totally fell for it, bro. Like, holy crap, these guys are talking to somebody from space.
Dude, your imitation of me.
Yeah, man. Like, he was just like, it was so much fun to be around him. And he would call us up and he'd be like, dude, come out, I'm having a barbecue, or come on out, we're gonna go looking at this place, or these guys are coming to map the cave, you guys gotta come out. And like, it was so much fun hanging out with him. And I mean, ever since the first time we got out invited, he was the kind of person where, and I'm like, Kyle is far more extroverted than I am. I've always been more on the introverted side of the scale. Like, I don't easily just instantly get along with people, but Booker was like, bam! We start talking, and he just makes you feel at ease instantly. Everything was funny. It was a lot of fun to hang out with him, and just like, there was just like, it was zero perspiration, That's what he was like. He was just an all-around great guy, and it was awesome to have him starting to listen to the podcast and loving it. And it was really cool. He brought us out there another time, and if any of you are following us on Twitter, I posted the video of the dinosaur footprints that he took us to see on his ranch.
Dude,
that's what that video
we
was
went
from.
out there and like it was like pouring down rain.
That's why my boots are wet in that picture.
we're crossing. We had to cross the fence line to go onto his aunt's property. So he's like, "Well, let me call her just to make sure, And she's like, it's raining." He's like, "Oh yeah, we're just gonna go look at the dinosaur footprints." Yeah, don't worry, we're not gonna die. We'll be careful. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun, and he had so much amazing stuff out there, and he loved hanging out with us and talking about all this ancient stuff. And we'd come out and he'd start handing us artifacts. Hey man, what do you think of this? Like, what is it? Do you think this is this a fossil, bro? And it's just like, it was just so cool, his enthusiasm. And and he took us on the first sort of like reunion tour where he brought us for the first time after listening to the podcast. And he had gone over like every square inch of his property, with a fine to try to find artifacts and everything. So he had some really nice stuff that he had found in the house, and he was showing us that stuff first. And one of them was beautiful. I think we actually put a picture of it on.
Yeah, we did.
The episode with
62 with Clint.
It looked like a tomahawk blade or something.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, so when we're going around, he's like taking us on this tour of his exploration to the sites that he thinks might be something. He brings us to, he's like, this is where that artifact was found. So I immediately just drop down on all fours and start crawling on the ground. And I'm like, oh yeah. Flint flakes, here they all are. Flint flakes everywhere. Like, here's some snail shells. Bam, here's a freaking broken arrowhead. And I'm like, where's the mound? And I look up, and it's just like there's the tree line ahead of me, and back in there is just bam, this huge freaking mid mound, untouched. Yes, dude, this is one. And then of course, you don't want to leave as soon as you find that.
He's like, no man, come on,
you gotta check out the next
check out
site.
this other place where we found this other thing.
So we go to the next site, and they had dug a little pothole, a test hole in this part, and like we're walking up to it, and I'm just like, OMG. That's another one.
Yeah.
Bam, big old mound there. It was cool. And he had big plans to explore that property and explore the depths of the mounds and see what's there. So sadly, he won't be able to do that anymore. But now he knows all of the real answers.
Right.
To the real question.
So wherever he is, he knows the answers, and he's also partying with people and making them laugh. That's just how he was.
Cheers to you.
Cheers to you and farewell, Booker. You were a great friend and a awesome snake bro. You will be missed. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, Brothers of the Serpent Podcast. The hosts of this program are driven by a relentless and unstoppable pursuit of pyramids.
Yes?
And we are going to call this our first segment of the show.
Yeah.
The initial segment was a bonus. And, of course, we are joined by the infamous Watcher, deep in his underground bunker, underneath his deep space station in deep outer space.
In his 3x3x3 cylinder of science.
That's right. How you doing, Watcher? You gonna surf the web for us tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I love this sort of building joke. It's hilarious to me that Booker was like, dude, you guys totally had me.
He's like, you gotta talk to someone in space. It was awesome, dude.
He's in his own form of outer space. That's right. I mean, technically everything outside the cube is outer space, so...
Man, it's so freaking foggy here today. I almost gladded on the way to the cube. Yeah. Just go out the door and try to find the tent if you can get lost in the fog and die. Yep. All right. So, as always, we start with Space Weather News from spaceweather.com. China farms the moon. There's a new form of life on the moon. It is a potato. Studies released today by the China National Space Administration show that rapeseed, potato, and cotton seeds are sprouting inside the Chang'e 4 lunar lander, which touched down on the moon's far side earlier this month. This experiment in far-out farming could pave the way for future Chinese astronauts to live and work on the moon. NASA, meanwhile, is on fate. A collision in the asteroid belt. Last week, astronomers working with the Atlas project in Hawaii announced an astonishing change to asteroid 6478 Gault. The space rock had sprouted a tail. It is now gliding through the asteroid belt, giving every appearance of being a comet. On January 9th, Damien Peach of Selsley, UK, photographed the 6478 Gault and its 400,000 kilometer long tail. And we'll put this, it's a little picture. It's pretty cool. We'll put this in the show notes. Look at that.
Hey, that star looks like a heart. It's an arrow through the heart.
This is a 60-minute sequence of images which I captured using a 20-inch telescope, says Peach. So what happened to 6478 Gault? A clue may be found in its lineage. Asteroid Gault is a member of the Phocaea family. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong.
Who is 62784 Gault?
A swarm of rocks in the inner asteroid belt that formed as a result of an inter-asteroid collision some 2.2 billion years ago. The family gets its name from its most massive survivor, 25 Phocaea, which is about 75 kilometers in diameter. Gault's tail may be a result of recent collision. Researchers at the Atlas project have looked at images of Gault in December 2018 and January 2019, extrapolating its appearance backward in time. They suggest that Galt hit another object in the Oakley Belt in November 2018. If he is correct, the tail would be debris from the crash. Asteroid Galt was discovered in 1988 by the famous astronomer couple Carolyn and Eugene Shoemaker at the Palomar Observatory in California. For the next 30 years, the 4-kilometer-wide space rock did little to attract attention. Now, astronomers around the world are eagerly monitoring 6478 Galt to see what happens next. Stay tuned.
Surely it's going to a breakaway civilization for comments. Afternoon.
Well, the other thing about this that's interesting is, the asteroid can be totally safe, not an LEO, not an Earth-crossing object,
And then suddenly,
and then it turns into a comet.
they have jets that can, change things.
I cannot do that.
Full sideways thrusters. I don't know what they call them in space. All right,
Lateral.
and due to space weather, Earth's magnetic pole is on the move fast, and we don't know why. Planet Earth is alive. Deep beneath its skin, its lifeblood. Rivers of molten iron pulse around its core, and this mobile iron is what generates the magnetic field that causes auroras and keeps us alive. So this story, by the way, is news.com.au. Straight up news.com.
Yeah, news.com from Australia?
But, according to the science journal Nature, something strange is going on deep down below. It's causing the magnetic North Pole to skitter away from Canada towards Siberia. The magnetic pole is moving so quickly that it has forced the world's geomagnetism experts into a rare move, Nature reports. The World Magnetic Model, which governs modern navigation systems, will soon undergo an urgent update. This model is a vital component of systems ranging from geopositioning systems used to navigate ships through smartphone trackers and maps. The current model was... Wait, it's navigating ships through smartphone trackers? No, sorry, I misread that.
Yes.
The current model was expected to be valid until 2020, but the magnetic pole began to shift so quickly it was realized in 2018 that the model had to be fixed now. They realized that it was so inaccurate that it was about to exceed the acceptable safe limit for navigational errors, Nature reports. Every year, geophysicists from the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the British Geological Survey do a check on how Earth's magnetic field is varying. This is necessary as the liquid iron churning in the Earth's core does not move in a constant manner. In 2016, for instance, part of the magnetic field temporarily accelerated deep under northern South America and the eastern Pacific Ocean. This shift was captured by satellites. The movement of the North Magnetic Pole has been the object of study since 1831. Initially, it was tracked moving along the Arctic Ocean at a rate of about 50 kilometers each year. But since the mid-1990s, it has picked up speed. It is now shifting at a rate of about 55 kilometers an hour. Another recent study has revealed the Earth's magnetic field has been moving now for some 1,000 years. Why the magnetic field is shifting so dramatically is unknown. Geomagnetic pulses like the one that happened in 2016 might be traced back to hydromagnetic waves arising from deep in the core, Nature reports. And the fast motion of the North Magnetic Pole could be linked to a high-speed jet of liquid iron beneath Canada. The fast-flowing molten river appears to be weakening the magnetic influence of the iron core beneath North America. And as global warming opens up more shipping lanes to the north of Russia and Canada, this presents a potentially deadly problem. The fact that the pole is going fast makes this region more prone to large errors, Nature quotes Arnold Chuliat, a geomagnetist at the University of
cannot
Colorado
do that.
Boulder and NOAA, as saying. What's his name? His name is Arnold Chuliat. What do you want to do, Arnold?
I want to be a geomagnetist at the University of Colorado Boulder and NOAA.
Oh, wow, that's great.
That's actually a pretty cool idea. Hell yeah. Yeah.
I would totally get that kid.
Yeah.
Yes.
High five, buddy. So, but don't worry, guys. Everything's fine. We're not going to have a magnetic pole shift.
No, because only one of the poles is moving.
That's right.
The South Pole
Just
is solid as ice.
Right.
And the
Which
North
is-
Pole is, due to global warming, the North Pole is melting. South Pole's got plenty of ice, but the North Pole is melting, so the pole is like, oh God, where do I go? It's global warming.
It's always known where to be because of the ice, and now it's kind of lost. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's the piezoelectric.
It's heading into Russia. That seems suspicious to me.
I know, it's like, I'm gonna go where all the meteorites are.
All right, so are we done with space weather news?
Yeah, but I have a couple other quick stories here, if you don't mind.
No, go for it. I mean, I have more stories, but I've got this. I've got a great email from the Watcher Father, from the Grand Watcher, about episode 80. But we'll do your stories and then go to that because I want to talk about some about episode 80 way later. So go ahead.
Okay, cool. So I got one real short one. 20,000 satellites for 5G to be launched, sending focused beams of intense microwave radiation over the entire Earth. We're all gonna die, folks. 5G will use phased array antennas to shoot beams of radiation at cell phones.
Just a clue for those of you in New the sun shoots beams of radiation at us all the time.
5G phones will be much more powerful than previous phones. Just letting you know. Okay, I have one other story.
But we'll get through it because
Life finds a way.
That's right. and this is a perfect follow-up. Right here. Scientists identify vast underground ecosystems containing billions of microorganisms. I'm not going to read from this story, but basically, they were drilling down basically like 3 miles underground.
Yeah.
Right. And they were taking up cores and finding all of this life that's down there.
right.
Like where there's everything's under ridiculously high pressure and there's no sunlight and there's nothing.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the biosphere, the subterranean biosphere, has between 15 billion and 23 billion tons of microorganisms. Hundreds of times that. The combined weight of every human on the planet. So yeah,
Life
we'll find a way. Even if
Right. I mean,
that's
like
a pretty cool story. It's from The Guardian, theguardian.com. Scientists identify vast underground ecosystems containing billions of microorganisms, and it's a pretty good story. I read it.
so. There's
I
a
promise.
yeah.
I'm not just clickbaiting the headlines.
There's a great science fiction story that kind of like has this interesting thing about that. It was called Light of Other Days by Arthur C. Clarke and somebody else. I can't remember who else wrote it with him, but in it, the premise was that they were using computer engines, or little tiny spinning engines built out of like atoms, basically, so that between the pieces that were spinning was so little space that nothing could get in there, and it was actually really empty space, and the magnetic fields in there allowed you to fill wormholes to any other spot. So basically, they were first using them. Stephen Baxter. Thanks, Walter. Arthur C. Clarke, Stephen Baxter. Light of Other Days. So the original premise was they would use these little Casimir engines to open and like enlarge and sort of maintain a wormhole. And the theory is that, according to quantum physics, so there are wormholes connecting every possible spot with every other possible spot in the universe. So there's an infinite number of them to choose from, right? So at any given point, wherever you are, you could pick a wormhole that went to the spot you wanted to look at. Okay, because light, basically data, can go through the wormhole, but nothing else, just the photons, because they're tiny, and the wormholes are like tiny, right? So these are not something you travel through, just to pull light from. So basically, the light tube to some other spot. And in the beginning of the story, they're just using it to look, in places around the world, and then they realize, like, wait a minute, this is quantum physics. you know, and if space and time are the same thing, can we also use them to look in the past, right? So they had started doing that. And then they were able to build the engines to where they could basically focus onto a, basically like lock it onto DNA, okay? So two of the characters, the main characters in the story, at one point, they sit down in front of the big monitor where basically the visual data from the wormholes that they're looking at is coming in, and they've got it to where it is locking on to their ancestors' DNA, and they're just going back in time, and it's locked on they're doing it matriarchally, right? So it's down the mother's line. So on the monitor, there's this woman's face, and it's changing like crazy because it's going back hundreds of years at a second, right? It's changing like crazy, and they're watching the background. It's still for a while because they, for generations, lived in the same spot, and then suddenly everything changes and they're somewhere else, right? And they keep going back in time, and right, so it's evolutionary. So the person is getting more and more primitive looking eventually, and then they get down, but the face doesn't move, so it's just like, and the world is changing, and the crazy cataclysms happen, and they're in a different spot, and then everything's covered in ice, and it's going, and the face is changing and changing, and finally they got this little, like a little lemur, like a rat thing, right, that they're looking at, and that's their like incredibly distant 50 million year old mother, and that goes down, and like the thing eventually turns into this little worm, and then turns into some slime on the surface, and then it goes way down deep underground, right? And they're watching it, it's way down underground, and it's just sitting there for hundreds of millions of years. And then all of a sudden it starts going back up to the surface. And when it comes out on the surface again, they freeze it, and the whole world is totally different, and it's in a test tube that's being held by a completely previous race, completely previous to everything we know of in a methane-generated world, right? Where there was no oxygen.
Right.
So,
Holy smokes.
yeah, I love that idea that, like, light of other days, just, you know, you can track this all the way back in time, and the idea of like biotics living way underneath the ground, and then there's a huge cataclysm that destroys everything, and then it eventually comes to the surface and then spreads and then becomes,
And it's like it's plant form or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like actually using oxygen, and it starts putting oxygen into the atmosphere.
right. And it was a test tube from some scientist of this totally unknown, completely different life form that was based on methane from a billion years ago or whatever. Really cool. Light of other days, great story.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, I got one more. The Little Ice Age, hundreds of years ago, is still cooling the bottom of the Pacific. Researchers find. So once again, I'm not going to read the whole story, but basically they're talking about the Little Ice Age, which happened around the 17th century, between the 17th and the 19th century, I believe.
Yeah, devastated crops, caused famine, and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but basically, a Harvard study has found that parts of the deep Pacific may be getting cooler as a result of a climate phenomenon that occurred hundreds of years ago. The models suggest in the deep temperatures are... That's not written right. The models suggest the deep temperatures are dropping at a depth of around 2 kilometers or 1.2 miles down. They're still dropping.
Oh, well.
And they're saying like this, the surface...
It's a delayed effect, basically.
They don't know. So basically, they went back to like 1800s data where these guys went out and dropped thermometers like way down underwater.
Yeah.
And we're measuring deep ocean temperatures right in the 1800s, and they corrected for pressure on the thermometer and stretching of the hempen rope that they were using, and did all this work on it to get these more accurate temperatures. And they're like, no, it's still getting cold. It's still cooling down there.
Oh my god, lots of more about this thermometer.
So I thought that was interesting. It's, you know, they're saying that the surface temperatures have warmed quite a bit, obviously, since the Little Ice Age. Yeah. But there's this weird thermal discontinuity somewhere where, like right around 1.2 miles or something, it's actually still decreasing in temperature and has been since the 1800s. It's still getting colder.
Wow.
While the surface has warmed up. So they don't. So this is like, you know, all these climate scientists that are studying this stuff are like, whoa, it's kind of turning their heads because they never predicted this in their models.
Yeah.
And so they're now going back to do a whole lot more research on the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age.
Oh yeah, cool.
And trying to collect whatever data they can to see if...
And the colder the ocean is, the bigger of a carbon sink it becomes.
Yeah.
Because like the warmer it is, the more it outgasses the carbon it's holding already, right?
Right.
So the colder it is, the more it can hold. So if it's still getting cool, if it's still cooling off, then it can be a carbon. It's like increasing its ability to carbon sink.
Yeah. one of our buddies, Kmart, went to an ice cave in New Mexico. Oh yeah. It's like in the middle of the desert. And it's hot. You like go down in this cave and it's full of ice.
Right.
And they used to mine the ice out of there. Like for, back in the day. It's like,
Yeah.
that's just crazy. How is there ice down in a cave in the middle of the desert? I don't understand. What's making it cold?
Right. That's so we have springs here. Some of them are deep springs where the water comes out and it's freaking ice cold. No matter what temperature it is on the surface, the water comes out and it's freezing.
Yeah.
So it's like it makes you think that like this is coming from ice down there somewhere.
And it's like, to me, I look at it in terms of energy, and energy being, vibration, resonance. And I'm trying to figure out, well, what is something must be drawing the energy away from the area. In other words, like, okay, when you think of an insulator, like say, glass, for example, if you heat,
I was thinking my polar bear jacket.
okay, so if you have, say, a glass rod, if you heat one end of the rod, you can heat it to melting point, and you will not feel it in the other end of the rod that you're holding. Right. It's insulating that. So the vibration of the atoms in glass do not, like, they resist resonating with each other in some way.
Right. Especially thermally. They're not going to transfer that heat across the entire thing. Well, it will eventually, but it takes a long time to get across it.
Right.
Is that what you're talking
That's
about?
what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Thermal
yeah.
resonance. So in other
Yeah.
words, like when you're heating something, like the individual atoms are starting to jiggle, as Feynman said.
Ice caves and Bandera volcano, Grants, New Mexico.
What?
Bandera? What's the Bandera in there? Bandera volcano, Grants? Is that what it's called? Watcher?
No, he's saying whatever they find, the answer won't be CO2 ice caves and Bandera volcano grains.
No. That sentence was different. I saw that come up and then later the next one came up.
So what I'm saying is that the insulator resists transferring that heat vibration or the jiggling of the atoms to other atoms, right?
Yeah.
But whereas a conductor, like if you took a copper rod and you heated the end of it with a torch until it was melting, you wouldn't be able to hold on to the other end of the rod for very
Right.
long because
Yeah.
it would start getting hot. It's transferring that heat,
Yeah.
right? Well, then there's like heat sink, something that can actually absorb that heat energy.
Yes.
And so like metals, conductors do this very well. So if you put a conductor next to an insulator, when any part of the insulator gets hot, the conductor that's touching that part of the insulator
Can
will
pull the heat off
absorb
of
the
it.
heat off of it,
Yeah.
right?
And then can radiate.
And irradiate it out.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at this ice cave. It's like
So you think it might be a function of the stone that's around there or something?
yeah, there's got to be something going on where the stone is something good, something way down there underground is it's basically an insulator surrounded by a conductor, where the conductor is actually cool, generally speaking. So it can it's drawing off any heat energy from the area until it's.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Well,
Doesn't make any sense.
I've also thought of just like basic, like cooling. Like if there's wind moving past a bunch of water somehow, right? Then you end up with this cooling effect, and you end up
Evaporative
with,
cooling.
Yeah, evaporative cooling. But I don't know if that will make you.
Phase change.
Yeah.
Phase change. So.
Okay, so he says it's called the Bandera Ice Caves and Volcano in Grants, New Mexico.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. I was like, Bandera is where we live.
Doxed.
And somehow I was like, wait, we went and visited a volcano.
Yeah, we
nearby,
might have been as a volcano, but it
maybe-
wasn't in Bandera.
Maybe he's talking about us getting government grants to do a CO2 ice cave in Bandera.
And then he's saying,
Stand down, God.
Oh, God. All right. Yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Walker. That's good. So the place he went to, our friend, was called the Bandera Ice Caves and Volcano. That's good. Grants. New
Yeah, so there's an ice cave next to a volcano.
Yeah, makes all kinds of sense.
No, I was talking to Archer about it, and he was like, well, there's, like, we were talking about the thermoelectric coolers,
Yeah.
where you apply an electric impulses to this thermoelectric cooler, and one side of it gets really hot and the other side gets really cold.
Yeah.
So it's like the electricity in there does something somehow where it draws all the energy to one side and it's pulling the energy out of the other side. So that side gets really cold as this one gets, as the other side gets hot. And it's like there's got to be something like that going on.
Yeah, it's a microwave freezer.
Maybe there's some crazy crystalline stuff down in there, so it's like piezoelectric.
Yeah,
that's
could be that
causing
too.
this. That's causing this thermoelectric cooler
Yeah.
to happen. I think that's what it's called, thermoelectric cooler. I don't know.
Interesting.
Thermo cooler. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, thermo is just, I mean, cool is just a lack of heat, right? So anything thermo is moving temperatures around,
Yeah,
right?
that's cool.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. So this is an email about episode 80, which we did with GMA about the Impossible Blocks. It's a fantastic episode. I thought so. I loved it. So this is what he says. Number 1, I've always meant to tell you that since you say tangent so quickly, it sounds like you call the studio the Candy Cube of Science. Number 2, how can any serious scientist ignore these data? I cannot help but feel that it's an intentional suppression for some reason. Talking about the Serapion boxes. I totally agree, man. It's the fact that they just set these things aside and just pretend that they don't exist is, it's very difficult to not start to be conspiratorial about it. You know, it'd be like, okay, there is a conspiracy to hold this stuff back. It's an intentional suppression, like you said. So, number 3, this is about, this is referring to us talking about moving the Impossible Blocks of Baalbek, and we were talking about, you know, having to use Impossible ropes and Impossible logs, and he goes, maybe those guys put them on rollers made out of whatever the drills were made of, like the drills that were, right? And then they used chains made of that same stuff, of various lengths, to pull them with teams of elephants into the plane, and then they just flew them over there.
Is this the Grand Watcher?
So yeah, it says maybe those guys put them on rollers made out of whatever the drills were made of, and used chains made of it, of various lengths, to pull them with teams of elephants into the plane, and then they flew them over.
That's great.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds goofy, but what else are you gonna say? Like, there is no road, right? This is one of the biggest things to me with the Baalbek blocks. There is no road. Like,
any road that carried those blocks had to be stronger than those blocks. And so if the blocks are still there, the road should still be there.
That's right. That's right. That's a good point. That's a really good point. And I was also thinking, when I was listening to the show, we were talking about, you know, like, these guys are leaning, you're talking about your 800 dudes that weigh 80 tons or whatever, and they're leaning back on their ropes or whatever. You know, so not only do you have the 2,000 tons or whatever of the blocks sitting on the road, and then the 80 tons of the dudes on the road.
Yeah.
But then
the applied pressure that they're
it's going
on,
laterally.
Right.
So the road's going to want to wrinkle.
It's going to, yes.
You know, and then the block being pulled towards that is going to want to wrinkle it up too. And like, it's just, but it doesn't matter. All the road stuff is bullshit because there is no road.
Yeah.
There isn't one. There isn't, like, you can look at the mountains. Like, if there was a road that they had made a long time ago and then it just disintegrated, completely disappeared, you would still see the mountain. And there isn't one.
We tried to pull a dump truck full of asphalt out of, like, less than 1 foot deep tire ruts that we got stuck in with 2 tractors. And all they did was dig holes with their tires. Right. It didn't even, and the dump truck's tires are gone, and the 2 tractors are pulling backwards, and we're just all digging holes.
Right, and everything's made of iron and steel and using all kinds of, like, I mean, there's thousands of horses involved and nothing happens.
Right. And that was like, that dump truck probably carried, 12 tons.
Yeah, 12 tons max.
Yeah.
12.
I mean, there is no road that I know of that you can pull that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you put it on that thing where they move the shuttle with it, you probably could. You know, it's a thing that basically moves all the tracks that goes all the way across the entire superhighway. That moves about
Stand down.
2 feet an hour. Totally fly down on specially made roads that look like superhighways. Yeah. If you put one block up there, that thing might be able to do it. If you could get it up there. And if it didn't buckle in the middle because of the weight, it's not distributed right. So, I mean, we could move those blocks. That's the thing. We could move them today, but it would be a ridiculous thing to
Move them on the thing. You have to pick them up.
Right.
And then whatever's picking them up has to be far enough away from the block to get that track thing underneath it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
we don't have a crane that can do that.
Right. It would have to be one of the. You'd have to build some enormous gantry thing or whatever
Right.
with the like. And even those cranes, like one they use at ports, they pick up the giant cargo boxes, the steel boxes full of stuff. They
cannot do
can't
that.
lift anywhere near that.
I think there are a couple of different cranes. I was looking into this. They're built on site. They're massive, and they can lift it. Like they can lift more than that.
Right.
But they're ridiculously huge.
Right.
And
They're inbuilt. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember what this one is called, but it's Megala something or other.
Yeah. I was wondering what would happen if like you put something like that. Like could your average train car hold that kind of weight? Probably not. Like, they'd have to distribute it across most of the cars. That wouldn't work. 1,650 tons is a lot of weight. It's a ridiculous amount of weight. But somebody was carrying them.
We couldn't pull 12 tons with 2 tractors and the 12 tons.
I cannot do that.
That moved by themselves.
That's right. Out of this tiny little rut.
Yeah. They had their own motive power, and we still couldn't move it. So, I had a couple other thoughts about that show, but we need to take a break real quick, so we will do that, right? You're at the break spot?
Yep, here.
Yeah.
You interpreted that clock correctly.
All right. I don't know why I'm looking at the clock when I got this nice little hourglass thing here. But anyway, we're going to take a break. We'll come back, and I got some more thoughts on episode 8.
Stand down.
Be right back.
I cannot do that. I cannot do that.
And we are back here at the Snake Rose Institute for Advanced Corporate Studies, where there are no degrees, just certificates of ignorance.
I cannot do that.
So,
Please join our certificate program.
get yourself a certificate of ignorance from Snake Rose Institute. Proudly display it.
That's right.
I don't know shit about what's going on.
Go look at all of the impossible blocks all over the world, and you will gain your certificate.
All right, so back to episode 80 again. One of the things we joked about on that show was, you know, the how many T-Rexes is one of these blocks. And we actually, so at the end of the show, we're all hanging out, and we actually figured this out with the Watcher's help and GMA and Kyle doing calculations on his phone. And I posted some of this on the Twitter feed, but basically,
Go back.
like one of those blocks beneath the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, the bigger ones, the 1,650 ton blocks, whatever, is equal to 120 T-Rexes. The average weight of an adult T-Rex, 120 of those, right? The other one that we were looking at
It
was,
was
like,
actually the larger size of the T-Rex.
oh, okay, yeah, the adult males or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was like 122 or better, but you know, 120 is basically like a good average, you know. But the other one we were talking about is Walmart parking lots full of cars. And so we figured this out, like, we went and figured out, like, how big is the entire lots for a Walmart supercenter, like, not just a regular Walmart, but the supercenter, where, like, you drive in and it takes you 30 minutes to get to the store after you enter their property or whatever. So the supercenter and then the store itself, and you subtract, you get the size of the lot, you subtract the size of the store, and then you have the parking lot, basically.
And you figure the average car space.
Right. So we went out and figured out how big is the average car space capacities or whatever. So how many cars can you park in an acre, and then how many acres is this? And then we figured all that out. And then the average weight of a vehicle is about 4,000 pounds, which is 2 tons. because you have 6,000-pound vehicles, which are the big SUVs and trucks, down to the family sedans, which are 2,000 pounds, right? So the average weight,
Yeah, 1 ton for the small.
right, 1 ton, 2 tons, and basically, and then 4 tons. So basically, or 3 tons. So you basically end up with a 2-ton car, 4,000 pounds is the average weight. So we figured out that if you had that Walmart Supercenter parking lot, like 2/3 or like 3/5, something like that, 2/3 full of cars, and you crunch them all together into a block the size of 4 parking spaces, that's way the same as one of those blocks. 2/3 full. Like, have you ever seen a Supercenter parking lot that full except for at Christmas? Right, so think of that. Go find yourself a Google picture or whatever of a Walmart parking lot full of cars and think of crushing them all together and then trying to pick them up.
Snake science. That's what you gotta do.
That's right.
Trying to conceptualize the weight of this block.
Right, it's very difficult to talk about. I mean, like 1,600 tons is just, you can't really imagine it, So I find that fascinating. You got to figure out ways to get these weights across. This is why we call them puzzle blocks. 120 T-Rexes is a lot.
Yeah.
So the other thing going back and listening to that show or whatever, and I was really fascinated with the whole Serapium stuff. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like the idea, like I was looking at the pictures when I was going to post up all this stuff on the show notes. So I'm looking at these pictures of the Serapium tunnels and the blocks and everything like that. And it's interesting if you look at the tunnels themselves of the Serapium cut through the limestone bedrock, they're heavily eroded. Okay, and there's 2 different types of erosion, which is very interesting. There's from the floor up to, say, I don't know, like waist height, there's a type of erosion, and then above that, it's something else. Okay? You can tell that it's different types, and it makes me think of like water and mud, or I don't know, something like there's material on the floor, and then the rest of it's full of water, because it looks like, and then there are places where you can see like calcification of the walls, where stuff built up on them over time, right? Right. So I'm thinking about these boxes made of granite in their own little alcoves that are set down in these sockets, right? And I'm thinking about all these old stories where people are told to basically make these caches of technology and knowledge to be recovered after this or that cataclysm, the one of fire and ice that Ahura Mazda tells everybody to build the Varas for, right? Or the one of the water, the flood, basically, the Utnapishtim, the Gilgamesh story, flood. So you have these people that are told, do this, like store your knowledge, and then mark it that spot so that it can be retrieved in the future. And I was thinking about how these things make a hermetic seal. Well, that's perfect for preserving something like keeping the water out, basically. Like, why would you need a hermetically sealed box in a desert underground?
Yeah.
Unless that thing was you're putting very fragile things in there, and it's going to have water in there for a long time. Right? Yeah. So that those boxes would have been airtight, and they would have kept water out. So, and then that kind of
Granted on granted.
that kind of made the hurried aspect of some of the alcoves make more sense. Like, you can think, okay, so they plan this whole thing out and they're doing it, and then as D-Day gets closer, right, the day of the cataclysm gets closer and closer, people are showing up with armfuls of stuff. They're like, dude, we should store these out just from wherever. And they're like, oh crap! And so they just dig one and they throw it in there, And so it's kind of hurried at the very end there.
Yeah.
And then it's never finished. There's a block in the hallway.
Yeah. And then all over the world, everywhere else, all of the
cannot
Masons
do
drop
that.
their tools.
Right. Everywhere.
Well, they took the tools,
Right.
obviously. They left their potsherds.
Yeah, there are blocks laying around, giant blocks that nobody has moved since, laying around all over the world, and all these interesting megalithic sites. So that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit. So we've discussed the island of Malta before. We've talked about the Hypogean. We talked about the strangeness with the Taurodont tooth, right? The whole tooth thing where the guy, it seems like they swapped it out for a different one to make it so that they weren't mute, or they weren't
The epoch is ours!
was it
Fire!
Neanderthals or whatever? Yeah. They don't bison bull off the inside of the hypogeum. Right. But we've never really kind of discussed the Cartwrights. Malta is covered in Cartwrights. So first of all, let's talk about the islands. It's a group of 3 islands off the south coast of Sicily, basically in the Mediterranean, right? So you've got 3 little bitty islands. Malta's the big one, and then there's one called Gozo and Kozo or something like that, 2 small ones, right? And they're basically uninhabited, but one of them, they have, both of those have Cartwrights and temples on them. Okay, and in some cases the Cartwrights go down into the bay between, come off Malta under the water, go down through the water all the way across the bay, and then back up onto another island. Right. So whoever made those Cartwrights did it before the water level was that high. And what's interesting about that is that the islands have been lifting up out of the ocean, and they've been doing this relatively quickly for a long time. So if you look at pictures of Malta, one side is a straight cliff coming up out of the water, and on the other side it just ramps all smoothly down in, right? The whole thing's been doing this sort of uneven lifting up, where one side is lifting up way faster than the rest. So it's tilting the whole place, right? So that's happening relatively quickly. So if all that has been rising, and yet there are still ruts going under the water, they have to have been made a long time ago, right? Because like the farther back you go, the deeper the island sinks into the water. So you have to go back farther enough.
Well, I wonder, is the seabed also rising? Because it's going to be at sea level.
What?
Water surface will be at sea level. Yeah. So even if the seabed is rising with it,
The epoch is
you know what I'm
ours!
saying? So like one side of the seabed is also rising with the side of the island, as opposed to just the island shoving up out of the seabed, which is sitting still.
Yeah, well, I think there's a fault there.
Okay.
Because I mean, it's clearly a flat cliff on one side. And that is what's lifting up. So I don't know.
okay.
Maybe you're right, but I think there's a fault. Okay, Watcher says Gozo and Comino are the smaller islands. Gozo has I think it's Gozo Gozo has the Gigantia temples. So this is what I want to talk about mainly with Malta is the temples. We've never gone into all the interesting temples that they have above ground there.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things I like to do when I do research on this stuff is I'll go look at all the sort of, go look at the popular literature on it, and you can look at Wikipedia and do all that stuff. But then dig into show me some travel blogs, people who have gone there and what are their impressions of the place, just people who've been traveling around the world, right?
The epoch
So I
is
found a couple of
ours!
those that I want
Riot!
to get to here. Because there's very interesting stuff about the culture itself that is very strange here. So let's see. First one is Mystery of the Tarxian. Okay, so this is from RyanMurdoch.com. So this is basically a guy who travels around the world and he just blogs about it. Okay. So I had an opportunity to go behind the scenes last week at one of Malta's most important megalithic sites, Tarxian Temple. And I'm probably butchering that name, but who cares? It was after hours, member-only visit to examine the most recent archaeological excavations and to learn a few things that aren't on the normal tourist itinerary. The megalithic temples of Malta were built during 3 distinct phases between around 5,000 to 2,500 BC. So 5,000 BC is... Right, so basically, think of this like that the temples of Malta, the megalithic temples of Malta, were the oldest known freestanding structures in the world until Göbekli Tepe, basically. They're older than the pyramids, they're older than Stonehenge. Wow. Okay, so up until Göbekli Tepe was found, which is 9,000 BC or whatever, these 9 to 12,000 BC, these are the oldest known structures in the world, anywhere. Okay. So he says, they're often claimed to be the oldest freestanding structures on Earth. They predate Stonehenge by a couple thousand years, and even the earliest pyramids of Egypt date to nearly 1,000 years later. Unfortunately, the builders of these monuments left very little behind. No cities, no writing, and no sign of advanced social stratification or craft specialization. Which is a weird thing to say.
Other than
building giant temples out of huge rocks, yeah. Because clearly just dudes in butt flats with spears can do that. I mean, they're all over the world, so you don't have to be specialized to do that, right? Okay, but besides the massive temples themselves, the only clues we have for understanding this mysterious people is some fragments of pottery, a few small carved statues, and the sculptural decoration of the temples themselves. All that we do know is that the story of the islands differed little from any other Neolithic society around the Mediterranean at that time. And then they experienced a sudden and unique flourishing and extraordinary advance in their art and architecture. This temple period produced its most notable monuments from around 4,100 BC to about 2,500 BC. And then suddenly, somewhere around 2,500 BC, the temple building stops. No one knows why. Just that the end of the temple culture appears to have been quite sudden. There were no signs of warfare, or disease, or severe agricultural pressures. At least, not enough to eliminate an entire population. All that's known for sure is that every one of the temples was abandoned. But that isn't even the strangest part of the story. The people who replaced those of the temple culture were totally different. They came later. They brought Bronze Age technology with them, and they bore no cultural continuities with the temple people who were the predecessors. It seems as if the Maltese Islands were abandoned entirely after the fall of the temples, and that they stood empty until these Bronze Age people arrived. We may never know where the temple builders came from, what happened to them, or why they vanished. But ongoing excavations like those being carried out at the Tarxian Temple complex are slowly trying to fill in the pieces of the puzzle. Okay. So that's the strange thing about this is like, number one, no one knows anything about who built these. And of course, you have to remember, they're ignoring everything they found inside the Hypogeum. Right. Because I'm like, well, there's 7,000 skeleton people right there, right? Inside the finger tooth. That looks exactly like these above ground temples, just underground.
Yeah.
But no one ever talks about that. Those guys were they were something else. They got washed in there later, you know? So, they're not the temple cultures, supposedly. So, the standard model idea here is that these people that no one knows anything about, that didn't have any writing or any social stratification or division of labor, show up, and they're totally normal, just like everybody else around the world. They didn't really do much but run around in spears and butt flaps on this little tiny island. And suddenly they built these gigantic temples for a couple thousand years, and then they just disappeared. They stopped and disappeared for no reason that anybody can find. No agricultural
Sounds
pressure.
about right. Like, if whatever you're doing, suddenly you decide you're going to build impossible-like temples, very soon after that you're going to disappear. Nobody's going to know why. I mean, that's...
It sounds
standard
similar.
story, yeah.
Yeah.
And that, you know, I'm making a joke, but at the same time, it's like, why would you build a temple out of massive blocks right before you disappear?
Right. Maybe because you're trying not to die in a giant
And
cavern.
maybe because you're trying not to disappear.
And clearly you failed. Well, at least except for the other Hypogeum that wasn't full of dead people.
Yeah.
Right?
You failed sometimes.
So this is the idea that I've gotten. This is just, you know, no one knows anything, so everybody's free to make theories or whatever. Like the idea that I got. So if you look at above ground plans of all these temples all over Malta, the other thing that makes them unique is that they're all circular. They're like Göbekli Tepe is circles within circles, but these are actually more like four-leaf clovers. They're very, I don't know what to say. They're very organic looking. Okay. Even the Hypogeum, if you look at that behind it, it's all these flowery circles, and there's no straight lines. You know, even the blady pillars are curved in almost every direction. They curve this way and they curve, you know, so it's like they did have corners, sharp edges, but everything is curved in some direction. There's no straight line. Right.
For those of you in Lake Hills, the Blady Pillars is a reference to the blender idea of the Hypogeum. There's pillars in there that have sharp corners.
Yeah. Those pillars
Lend credence to Russ's blender idea.
Those pillars look pretty blady.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was thinking, and the other thing about the below ground Hypogei that are incredibly smoothly finished. They look like a lot of the other very precise stuff that we find around the world. Now, the above ground temples are incredibly rough, on the other hand. It looks like they went along the island. So the island is made up of it's all sedimentary rock, giant fat layers of limestone, right? Eroded coralline limestone. It looks like they literally just went along and like ripped up giant raw blocks and stacked them up into temples without doing anything else. Like they didn't polish them or I mean, it doesn't even look like they cut them. They just broke them out of the, out of the quarries. Like, you just break a giant piece off. That'll work. Take it over there, stand it up. Like, so all the blocks are different sizes and widths and shapes. Very interesting looking construction with extremely heavy weights, but no one wasted any time trying to polish anything or do anything precise. And yet,
They're like full castle.
yeah, but that guy made square blocks. These aren't even square. Like, these people, everything was round. Like, and so it's very strange because when you look at these temples, like they have these external, like these enclosure walls, right? So the temple itself will be like this 4-leaf clover shape, and they would take a giant slab and stand it up, and they're like, "This is going to be the door. Cut a hole in it." Like, instead of making a door where you put one here and one here and put a lintel across, they just put a giant slab there and cut a hole straight through it. Right? That's the door. Yeah. And they're ripping up huge blocks right out of the ground and then standing them up, and so this one's really tall and narrow, and then
Are they like socketed into the?
yeah, they're socketed.
and
Yeah,
everything?
yeah.
Like, so the way they fit
Yes.
together, you're saying they're like rounded, but they fit together tightly, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, well, in some cases, there are places where you can see gaps or whatever, but like, it's still construction on an unbelievable level.
Yeah.
Right. And so on the island of Gozo, there's a temple complex called Gigantea. I think that's how you say it. Basically, it means place of the giants. Okay, because the locals there have for a long time had a legend that clearly giants built this.
cannot do
Enormous blocks are enormous. So there's an enclosure wall that Gigantea has, and it looks like
I cannot do that.
it looks like stuff you'd see at Sacsayhuaman or whatever, just not as polished,
Right.
right? But it's just all these different sizes, and the guy was saying that they use they use the technique of where you have tall blocks, right? Tall ones that are narrow, and then you have long,
Stand
short
down or
ones.
die.
Yeah.
And they would just alternate those, but every single one of them is a totally different size, and nobody bothered cutting them into any kind of standard whatsoever. It literally looks like they just were ripping up out of the ground, and whatever you got is what you used, and they stacked them up in this puzzle shape. It's awesome, right? And then and the walls are all curved and round, and everything's round. So there's the temples are even the word temple. Like, I don't even like using that word. There's one guy that I was reading that was talking about. He's like, look, man, no one knows what these were for. He's like, this one over here, it could have been a marketplace. Like, there's evidence that they were covered over with domes. Think about that, right? So you got these crazy circular temples, and then they were thinking that they had these domes over top of them in some cases. And in other places, corbelled ceilings. Right? And then, like, the doorway, like I said, is a slab that's got a hole in it. Like, the hardest possible way to make it door.
We want to walk through this area.
Giant slab of steps.
Right.
Dang it.
Yeah. Let's see. I got some other travel.
Down.
Here it is. Dave's travel pages. Great guy. This is a great page. This is an adventure travel blog, right? So he goes, megalithic temples of Malta. Who built the stone temples of Malta and Gozo? So he says, over the years, I've combined travel with visiting archaeological sites around the world. Don't worry, I don't have an Indiana Jones syndrome. I just have an interest in ancient civilizations just like Indiana Jones. On my recent visit to Malta, I had a chance to visit some ancient sites. In fact, it was one of my reasons to visit Malta in the first place. Megalithic temples of Malta were constructed sometime between 3600 and 3000 BC. Current dating puts them at older in Stonehenge and pyramids. So he says, Hagar Kim and Menasha, I think is how you say that one. These two Malta temples are found in close proximity to one another. You might argue that they are part of the same temple complex, quote unquote, as they are just a few hundred meters apart. There are a number of points where some of the stone slabs have circular holes in them. It is thought that they may have been, quote unquote, oracle stones. The theory goes that devotees or worshippers would be on one side and a religious oracle on the other. A prophecy or blessing could then have been given. There are also some doorway stones, so there's one of the doorways, right? Just a hole in the block. Yeah. And it's one of the hard ways to cut, like where you cut a shape, and then you cut a smaller shape inside that, and then a smaller shape inside that, right? And then there are pretty good corners on that, right? But you can see how sort of rough everything is.
Yeah. That's awesome.
They're like, that'll stand up there. Cut a hole in it, right? But it doesn't fit the side, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so he says, of course, there's absolutely no evidence for this horrible theory. It's only a theory. It could just have easily been a center for justice with an accused on one side and a judge or jury on the other. This is why I'm fascinated by places such as this.
Stand down. Or die.
Like, awesome, like, you know, lintel entrance and then a hole cut through it.
Kind of looks like the Romans.
Yeah, it does.
Like in Roman style.
Right.
You gotta have the
Side
side slab, like edged with the top slab, back slab.
Gonna be a whole quick.
Has to be like 1/3.
Basically, you're building a giant Earth.
Venus figures of Malta. Okay, so he says there are a number of figurines found on the site, now displayed in the Archaeological Museum of Malta. The most famous are the Venus-type figures. I have seen these all over the world. In South America, they are called Titans. The history of these Earth Mother figurines in Europe goes back over 40,000 years. Perhaps this was a religious complex after all, maybe, with priestesses instead of priests. There's one of the, so they have these, like, the Venus figurines are enormously fat. There's like the midsection. Right. So it's like this particular kind of, they call it Earth Mother. Like, so if you imagine these people are in the, what do they call it? So it's after the end of the Younger Dryas, there's this sort of long period of almost perfect warmth of the earth where everything, like, everything comes back into flowering and like all the ice melts and the waters. You know what they call that? The optimum, something optimum, whatever. The climactic optimum, something like that. It's 8,000 BC or whatever, when everything was awesome and you could basically just walk around and pick fruit off trees because everything was growing so amazing.
Garden of Eden.
Right. It's like Eden, yeah. So there's this idea that the Earth Mother Goddess is that Earth after the Younger Dryas, when everything's calmed down and it's just so overflowing with bounty that they just have to, like, everybody worships this giant fat woman that's the Earth Mother. It's like So now we talk about the Gigantea temples. The Gigantea temples are on the island of Gozo. They are the oldest of the megalithic temples of Malta, and the earliest phases of construction are dated between 3600 and 3000 BC, which is 5,000. Anyway, Gigantea is much cruder than Hagar Kim and Menadra, but at the same time, the rocks involved seem to be much larger and heavier. So, according you get the older ones, and it's right. There is no denying that they are from the same culture, but I had the impression that they were almost a first attempt. Right, like their guys are like, okay guys, we can do this better, but they don't have to be that fucking big.
They always have that.
It was the first attempt, we used the biggest rocks ever. Right.
And they were like, oh, we could do this out of smaller ones.
Yeah. This is a particular area you can see magnificent. So what was Gigantea? Whilst with the first two temples I could see how they might be an oracle center, I really didn't feel that way with Gigantea. Instead, I got the feeling that it was more of like a community building. Maybe this wasn't a temple at all, maybe it was a marketplace. Perhaps a place like a congress, a place where laws were passed. Could it even have been a bakehouse where bread was made? They had these fireplaces in them where they say sacrifices were made, but who really knows, right? So who built the temples of Malta? As the builders of these temples left no written records, the answer is, we will never know. Here's my theory, which is just as valid or invalid as anyone else's. This guy's a snake bro. I think the society that built the megalithic temples of Malta was more advanced than we give credit for. They were able to work together both to design and construct the temples for many years. Being able to transport enormous blocks of stone around shows they have long-term vision. It must have been an organized society that predated the temples themselves by hundreds of years. They must have had the ability to sail between the islands. Their use of Venus figures indicates a culture that stretched back for tens of thousands of years. Final thoughts on the temples of Malta. Conclusion. Visiting ancient sites such as the megalithic temples of Malta always makes me realize that there is so much about the world we don't know. It is probably one of the main reasons I like to travel and see places such as these. It's a reminder that we all just play a tiny part in a much bigger play going on all around us.
That's cool.
Dave's travel blog, guys, check it out. Dude's really cool.
So I had this theory a long time ago. Years ago, I was going through that website, ancienttexts.com,
Yeah.
and we're just about up on a break.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of a longer story. Well, it's not really that, but I'll tell it after the break. You guys are just gonna have to wait.
for 30 seconds.
All right, yeah. We'll take a break and we'll be right back and we'll listen to Kyle's, I'm sure it's going to be awesome, story. Fantastic.
Snake Rose, playing the drums of your ear through a complex process of transduction of vocal vibrations from within the tangent cube of science.
That was pretty good.
All right, so way back, I'm going to tell my story now. Way back, I was going through a wonderful website called sacred-texts.com.
Yeah.
And still love to go here and do research. It's got every ancient text in multiple different translations from multiple different scholars on pretty much everything you can find. And under Judaism, there is the Legends of the Jews. And
Solomon!
yeah, so The Legends of the Jews by Louis Ginsberg, 1909. This is a massive collation of the Haggadah, the traditions which have grown up surrounding the biblical narrative. These stories and bits of layered detail are scattered throughout the Talmud and the Midrash, and other sources, including oral tradition. In the 19th century, Ginsberg undertook the task of arranging the Haggadah into chronological order in a series of volumes. This series of volumes was the result. So in there, under volume 4, from Joshua to Esther, there is chapter 5, Solomon. Fantastic read. I'm not going to go through the whole Solomon tale, but basically, in a nutshell, this guy, this is where the idea of the Shamir comes from. Well, not comes from, but he was a seeker of this ancient tool that was able to turn stone into clay, basically, and carve it and do whatever you want, right? And he seeks it. Among other things, he got a ring from God that gave him the ability to control the demons, and there were a whole bunch of these demons that he summoned, and then the bad ones he bottled up, and they became the legendary Jinn, who are the genie in bottle. There were 72 others that he put to work for himself. He built all these people, and one of them in the story describes him sending this one demon who was kind of a bad one that he kept, but he was just like, pretty crazy. And he's like, you will cut stone. So the guy would just go down into the ocean and just carve up these massive stones and just bring them to him out of the bottom of the ocean. So it's like, imagine like bringing these massive limestone blocks, and he built cities and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, near the end of this story in the Legends of the Jews of Solomon, long after he had, become king and gained all the wisdom and mastered all the demons and learned all this crazy wisdom and whatever, I guess he met his wife,
The Queen of Sheba?
Yeah, Queen of Sheba
has
Amulet, whatever his name was. Yeah, and so he's now like he's an older king, and he's got multiple daughters, right? And one of his daughters, he had seen this vision in the stars. It foretold that his daughter would marry a lowly, poor, or some peasant,
a stoneworker.
Yeah, some peasant guy, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And he's like, no. And she's like his favorite daughter, and she's beautiful and all this stuff, and he's just like, no. So he raises an island in the sea and builds a tower on top of the island.
Yeah.
and he sends the daughter out there with like 90 eunuchs or whatever it is, like all these eunuchs, okay? Because he just is like, no way is any peasant taking my daughter's virginity. Meanwhile, there's this lowly boy who's out doing whatever. He ends up being stranded out in the wilderness. I guess probably on the high plains somewhere, and it's cold at night, and he can't get back, and he finds a carcass of an ox. And so he climbs inside the carcass of the ox to keep himself warm, right? Star Wars.
Yeah.
And Jim Lucas like totally predicted this.
Taurus. Yeah. That's right. Totally predicted it.
Anyway, he climbs inside the body of the ox to keep himself warm over the night, and this huge bird comes and... Yeah, I know it's George Lucas, watcher. I'm tweaking.
It's a long-standing joke.
I'm tweaking the nerds out there. The nerds will lose it.
Yeah, exactly.
So this massive bird comes and picks up the ox carcass and carries it, and the boy inside.
Yeah.
And he carries it out to this temple, out to the top of the tower, to eat it at night, and then basically the next day the princess comes up to the top floor of the tower to just like, you know, look out or whatever, and there's this boy, and he's like standing there, and she's like, whoa, how did you get here? And he's like, oh, an eagle brought me here, whatever. She's like, you stink. Well, then she finds out he's
sleeping inside this bowl.
yeah, so she sends him down to the eunuchs, and they get him all cleaned up and everything, and he anoints himself with oil, etc. And they give him new garb and whatever, and then like she sees him after that, she's like, oh my god, he's like stunningly beautiful. And then she starts to figure out that he's actually really smart, he's well educated, and like he knows all of this, he has all this knowledge and age, you know.
Yeah.
Ends up being a total badass. And she falls in love with him, and then she asks him to marry him, and they perform the ceremony there on the island, where she's like, you know,
with 90
imprisoned with 90 eunuchs, and they do this whole deal, and then eventually she gets pregnant, and the eunuchs figure it out. Solomon comes and he's like, what the hell? You know?
Yeah.
But anyway, he meets the guy, and he ends up like, oh my god, this is like totally badass. Like he realizes that, you know, there's sort of like, you know, the classical lesson in there.
Yeah.
Where his own actions ended up causing the very thing that was predicted to happen.
Right.
But my whole interest in it, and at the time you had been showing me the Hypogeum. This was years ago.
Yeah.
And that it's just basically on this tower that sticks out of the sea.
Yeah.
And then when it described that he raised this tower, and that the island is actually being shoved up out of the ocean, is still happening today. I was just like, oh my god, that's Malta. And the Hypogeum and all that is like where all the eunuchs lived and everything underground, and and the temple was made for the princess on top.
Hopefully she didn't become the Earth Mother though, because giant fat. Or maybe that's what they thought was beautiful back then. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it would be beautiful if we were all starving to death.
Yeah.
In an ice age.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was just like, dude, that straight up was, you know, that almost really bad demon guy that just like drew that whole island out of the ocean. Yeah. Brought the massive just peeled them up off the ocean floor of what was the ocean floor. And built that thing. And they used the Shamir to go in there and cut out the Hypogeum and everything.
Man, imagine having a demon that you could just command to reach a giant block from the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
God, that would be awesome.
What I've always been curious about, though, what do they eat? So we're doing this research, and they actually have this grain that they were able to grow. And it's just really hard and difficult to chew, so they just crushed it up.
Yeah.
And then they would mix it with a little bit of milk and heat it up.
I cannot do that.
And it was called Malta meal.
Yeah. I cannot do that.
All true into the very end there, folks. I think.
The wonder. I was literally searching grains growing on Malta. New excrement bag.
Oh, that was a good one. You had me going.
I am so full of coca.
So this is from ancientorigins.net, which is another fantastic site. This is written by John Black. The Hypogeum of Hal Salfini and an unknown race with elongated skulls. Many ancient magnetic structures exist in Malta, and one of them is the Hypogeum, a subterranean structure with magnificent properties that is more than 5,000 years old. The Hypogeum, a Greek word meaning underground, is supposed to be the oldest prehistoric underground temple in the world. The discovery of this incredible site was made in 1902 when construction workers who were excavating to build the foundations of a building stumbled upon what appeared to be an underground sanctuary. When archaeologists began uncovering the site, they found a massive underground structure consisting of 3 levels carved in the stone. It has been estimated that more than 2,000 tons of stone would have needed to be removed.
Stand down or die. Underground temple in the world. The discovery of this incredible site was made in 1902 when construction workers who were excavating to build the foundations of a building stumbled upon what appeared to be an underground sanctuary. When archaeologists began uncovering the site, they found a massive underground structure consisting of 3 levels carved into stone. It has been estimated that more than 2,000 tons of stone would have needed to be removed for its construction. So basically 1 Baalbek block. Right. Okay.
Just 120 T's.
Yeah.
Take care.
That's a look at that overview. That's pretty cool. But you can see how rounded everything is for the top level. Okay, so today the whole of the Hypogeum is underground, but in the past the main entrance was on the surface, decorated with megaliths. On the walls of the Hypogeum, many different patterns in red ochre were found. Shapes like spirals, pentagons, floral patterns, and even the outline of a bull adorned the walls.
Stand down or
Within the
die.
Hypogeum, archaeologists uncovered tombs, rooms of unknown function, and a main chamber, which is a circular room carved into rock with a few trilithon entrances. In this room, the statue of a sleeping lady was found, which is the Venus statue. Other rooms include the decorated room, the snake pit, the Holy of Holies, and the Oracle room, which has very peculiar acoustic characteristics. The acoustic properties of the Oracle room have been studied extensively by researchers. Anything spoken in that room is heard all throughout the Hypogeum. Furthermore, some research has shown that the acoustic properties of the reverberating sound affects human emotions. Research done by Paulo De Bertolis and Niccolo Visconti of the universities of Trieste and Siena, respectively, have shown that the construction of the chamber was made in a way to affect the psyche of people, perhaps to enhance mystical experiences during rituals. The use of fractal, non-linear resonances, which appear in the acoustics of the Hypogeum, is something that modern science has just now started to investigate, and the results show that these types of frequencies have the ability to alter matter. The sleeping lady found in the main chamber, along with other
The Shamir.
along with other figurines found in the Hypogeum, all display abundant forms. In other words, the figures appear to be extremely obese, and there is no agreement as to why this may be. One particularly interesting fact about the Hypogeum is that when it was discovered,
7,000 skeletons were found piled within the chambers. What's more is they had a unique characteristic, elongated skulls, and one of the skulls, out of only a handful that have survived, lacked the fossa median, which is the join that runs along the top of the skull. It is known that some of the skulls were on display in the Archaeological Museum in Malta. However, after 1985, all the skulls that had been found in the Hypogeum, along with other elongated skulls found across multiple ancient sites in Malta, disappeared without a trace.
They cannot do that.
And they have never been recovered. What remains to testify their existence and their abnormality are the photos of Dr. Anton Mitsu and his colleague, Dr. Charles Savona Ventura, and their books detailing the abnormalities of the skulls, including elongation, abnormally developed temporal partitions, and drilled and swollen occiputs, I'm not sure how to say that. Supporting the finding is an extract written in the National Geographic magazine in the 1920s, describing the first inhabitants of Malta as a race with elongated skulls. Quote, from an examination of the skeletons of the polished stone age, it appears that the early inhabitants of Malta were a race of long-skulled people of lower medium height akin to the early people of Egypt, who spread westward along the north coast of Africa, whence some went to Malta and Sicily and others to Sardinia and Spain. National Geographic magazine, 1920. It is, of course, highly suspicious that the evidence for such a significant discovery went missing. It appears to suggest that someone wished to keep the results of the finding out of public knowledge and perhaps out of the hands of researchers. A race of people with elongated skulls, a chamber of unbelievable acoustic properties, and the mysterious disappearance of more than 7,000 skulls and skeletons makes you think that something very special happened in this place, yet very few people know about it, and it appears that somebody wanted it to be this way.
So frustrating.
Yeah. So the other thing that's interesting about some of these skulls that I read somewhere else was that a lot of the ones with the really abnormal elongated characteristics also had 3 holes in them, like in a triangle shape. Like an equilateral triangle, like there's a whole
Like tray pan?
yeah, like tray panning, and but they're perfect little circles, and there's 3 of them, like in a triangle. Or sometimes in a line. It varies or whatever. So the Watcher's posting pictures up here of elongated skulls. Are those the ones from Nazca? Are they the Maltese ones? Because they are different. Those look like the Nazca skulls, but they could be. I don't know.
It looks like what's written on that skull is trim and go. Congo.
Congos. Chongas.
Chonga.
So, and then there's of course the missing fossa median, the line that basically that all humans have, where the skull plates at the top join together. Right? They start out separated at birth. Well, yeah, the line that join. Yeah.
Join the two.
Yeah.
They don't have
that suture at all. Yeah. The fossa median is what it's called. It's totally not there on the skulls. And there's other anomalous characteristics too.
But not double dentition.
No double dentition, and they don't appear to have been giants. They were small. Long heads, short bodies.
Very, very good at digging bunkers under space stations.
Yeah. So.
And what was the ocular holes or whatever it was? It's like something. You just said that there was something weird about the.
Oh yeah.
The word was oculars and made me think something going on with their eye holes in the skulls.
Let's see.
I don't know what the root word is.
Yeah, drilled and swollen occiputs.
Occiput.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what that is. What is that, Watcher? You want to come on and tell us what that is? Because that would be cool. Because I don't know what's going on here. Oh, is that what they're the eye holes?
Swollen occipits.
Yeah, essentially,
Yes?
the occiput is the eye hole.
Okay.
For lack of a better, like, general term, we can go with
eye holes.
Sorry. The occiput is at the back over the occipital lobe.
Oh, okay.
So right at the back where the base of your spine comes up, you have the foramen magnum where it attaches, and that's like where your skull starts to round upward. Like where it starts to curve, that's the occiput.
Oh, okay, so it's in the back of the skull behind the jaws, basically, back there?
Yeah, it's like directly at the back of your head because it covers your occiput.
Oh, okay. So they're not the eye holes. There's something else happening there.
But those eye holes in those skulls are
enormous, yeah.
very large and round.
Yeah.
All the better for watching.
Jokes are strong when you just use that.
Yeah, I'm trying to do my job here.
So,
You bring the content, I bring the dead.
so, like, this is what I'm saying, like, we're the temple builders, longheads, basically. You know, it almost seems like there was a race, an entire race of these people that live here. And, I don't know, like, it's not clear to me, like, is the Hypogeum older than the temples above ground? You know, are they later additions? Or are they first, and then they did the temple underground later? I don't know. I mean, they say that the Gigantea place is the oldest one on the 3 islands. So, but I don't know how they're dating them either. You know, I over time I've gotten extremely jaded and suspicious of the dating methods because they go in there and a lot of times they just attribute it to the last people who were using the place. I don't know exactly how they're getting the dates, but it is interesting to me that like they've been having to push the dates back to the temples for years.
Yeah. One thing that just occurred to me is that we've never in modern times experienced a sedimentary seabed go dry. Right. Where we could actually, before it becomes stone, tunnel into it. Yeah. So now I'm not trying to take away from possible, Shamir characteristics of the Hypogeum, but yeah, right. Like imagine some crazy volcanic whatever action lifts up the seabed and the sea drains. Yeah. Or you're in a period where whatever type of cataclysm happens and the sea goes away. Now you have this mud, right? Now deep under that mud, it's going to be turned into stone. It's been turned into stone for thousands of years.
Thick clay, and
So there's going to be this point where it's like sediment, thick, harder, more dense, eventually turning into stone. So if the sea dries up, and then within 100 years or so, you start tunneling into it. It's kind of like tunneling into the caliche that we call caliche here. It hasn't turned to stone yet.
Yeah, or sandstone clay or whatever, like we had in Georgia.
Yeah, so they dig out all these tunnels. It's structurally sound, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And they could possibly build. I don't know how the temple on top would have been built, but let's say that they dug all the tunnels first, and then it turns to stone.
Yeah.
So it's that old.
Right.
And then later, people, the sea comes back. There's all these tunnels there.
Yeah.
And some other people build on top of it, like kind of like a Göbekli Tepe type marker.
I see.
Of but there's cart ruts right in this mud.
Right.
That is now stone.
Yeah.
For example. So if the sea was not there, the cart ruts could come down off of the protrusions into the valley.
Yeah.
But I know that doesn't explain all the cart ruts either. Anyway, it was just an idea. I've never really thought of that before. Like, what happens if a sea dries up? Can we tunnel in it?
Yeah, or if just a piece of the seabed just lifts up out of the water all of a sudden. Like, what happens to it over time? And how long does it take for it to really harden and solidify?
Right.
Yeah.
Because like we use what we call caliche here. That's what I've always known it to be called here in Texas. It's basically limestone.
That hasn't stoned yet.
That's not a solid stone. It's lime stone particles.
Yeah.
And down to dust. From any size chunk down to dust, and it can be crushed pretty easily. But we will find areas on the hillsides where there's this perfect, patch. Basically, dig into it, and you'll get down far enough to where you start pulling up like, what we call potatoes.
Yeah.
On the hill.
Yeah.
And the potatoes are like hard chunks of stone that don't break down easily. So we try not to dig any lower than that and just keep digging into the side of the hill on that layer. And we pull out that material and we pack it on the roads. You wet it and pack it. And once it dries, it's almost like a concrete floor.
Yeah.
Like I built a floor for a guy, a neighbor, and he had a 75-foot square
I cannot do that.
covered barn. And I took Caliche, 75-foot square. It was 75 feet by 75.
Oh, okay, all right.
Did I say 100?
No, you just said 75-foot square.
Yeah, building.
Okay,
It's a barn. Huge building, and I took Caliche, that stuff, and just spread it out on the floor. Inside, it was a metal building. It was just covered. We just covered it with a roof, and I just set up a sprinkler inside the building and just broadcast the sprinkler until it was all soaked, and then I got a roller and rolled the whole thing with a vibrating roller past it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's concrete. After years of driving a machine inside there and turning tires and whatever, you'll break up dust.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of dust on it. It's like concrete floor. But it can be, you can chip into it with a chisel.
Right. So Caliche is like almost stone, but it's not quite.
It's almost,
for whatever reason,
yeah.
it hasn't turned into stone yet.
Yeah. So, but you can imagine that, say, if that floor was undisturbed for 1,000 years, it might be just like stone.
Yeah.
It's just like a slow concretion.
Stand down or die.
Yeah, so if that whole metal structure on top of it just got destroyed or whatever, and then that slab is there and it's covered up in something, and eventually the road's away, and then you're just kind of this flat square slab.
Right,
It's gonna
exactly.
be weird, right?
It's gonna be massive.
It's gonna have
block.
crazy tracks in it. No one's gonna
And it will have complete whole microscopic fossils that are
look like a natural thing.
yeah, because we're
Stand
digging
down
it out
or
as
die.
it's an aggregate. When you get it out of the rock, so it's got, if you were to look at it with a microscope or even to sit through with your hand with the tools in there, will be whole fossils, tiny fossils all in it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that has, the word is dissuaded scientists from thinking that things like Sacsayhuaman were aggregate or like concretions, like
What they were poured.
yeah, that they were poured because we grind that stuff down to a fine powder and it would shatter all the little fossils and the fragments.
Right.
And they found in some of these
When we're making Portland cement, they grind it into this incredibly fine powder, and there's nothing left but just a flat shard.
right. And so that's what you would find in concrete. The concrete has material
But if you didn't grind it that fine, some other way of solidifying it together, or whatever, and some way to mix it into a slurry and pour it, then you could get these things that look like natural rock, but they're not.
Yeah, because like these, like diatoms or whatever tiny
I cannot do
creatures
that.
might be in there, or even larger than that. They're going through a modern day industrial process to grind it. They would get shattered.
Yeah. Yeah, just send it through a mill and it's going to destroy it. Yeah.
But that stuff, we use it all the time, and if it never gets wet again after you wet it, what has happened under this building, it's just like a concrete floor. It'll slowly dustify. See if you're driving back the machine process.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But
that's
that doesn't explain the temple on top.
Right.
Right, because those are obviously like slabs that were pulled up in there.
I
You
cannot
can see
do that.
the hammer marks,
Yeah.
the chisel marks.
Yeah, and in some places they're still on end. Like the clay thing, it seems like it would sort of fold over. I don't know. I mean,
And there are some layers here that are hard, but not real hard. Like you could crush them up with a dozer, with steel tracks. If you drove over it, would just crush these stones.
Yeah.
But you can pull them out of there with a tractor, and they'll be whole.
Yeah.
If you hit them hard enough in the midsection or whatever, you might break it.
yeah,
But it's not quite stone, but it'll
Right.
hold together pretty well.
Right.
And you can stand it up. Maybe 1,000 years later.
right.
And it might be full of holes and whatever from the
cannot do that.
erosion, natural erosion that takes place.
Yeah, all the hills here are protected by caps of bluestone. That's what they call it. It's basically like limestone that's incredibly hard. I mean, like ridiculously hard. Even dozers can't really break it up. You know, you can see in some places where they tried, and it's just this giant boulder, and it's like sort of got scratch marks on one side, and they weren't even.
It's got a lot of silica in it.
Yeah.
It's crystallized.
Right. So the whole Malta thing to me is a fascinating mystery, and it's sort of encapsulated. It's by itself, you know, because that whole temple building period is isolated from everything else in time.
Yeah.
You know, and then there's all the mysteries appear on Malta at the same time. Like the Bronze Age people that showed up later, you know, I'm sure there's stuff about them that we don't know, but they didn't build any of the temples. They didn't make the cart ruts. When they showed up there, all that stuff was already there. The Hypogeum was already present, destroyed, buried, and full of people that were dead.
Right.
And they probably never found it.
And this is the other thing, like the idea that these are temples and they're places of worship, and all of this is all of these carvings and holes drilled in the rock and whatever have to do with you know, ritualistic practice. That really, to me, requires an entire society and many years and possibly millennia of development. Like we have religions today, and every single one of them is rooted in extremely ancient texts.
Right.
So the fact that they're attributing, you know, just some random structure in a place where they have no, there's no context to it.
Right.
To a like that you would get to the point to build some massive structure to some type of religion requires a long period of time beforehand to develop that, like, quote unquote necessity, right?
Yeah.
That they would go out on an island that couldn't really sustain like the entire culture itself and build all this stuff. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Again, it goes back to utility. You know, like I think the better question to ask is why did they need to build this thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
And you could imagine,
and people will point to like medieval cathedrals that are, they're like, well, why do they need this? And it's like, well, I pointed that, and I'm saying, like, I think this is just like the rest of the religious stuff today, is a holdover from a much more ancient time where we built giant things out of stone.
Right, but also
religions are carrying this tradition forward.
That's what I'm saying. The temples or the cathedrals require thousands of years of history prior to that to build up to this. And they're, you know, it's obvious. Like we have these texts that are thousands of years old, and these temples are not.
Right.
You know, they're not nearly that old.
Yeah.
But they've depicted all these texts on their facades and in their all of the artistic work, carvings and everything. So it's obvious that you wouldn't have that temple if you didn't have thousands of years of like knowledge that is being carried on and passed on in the form of religious texts.
Yeah, and like the guy said on Dave's travel blog, the Venus stuff has been found in Europe. It's like 40,000 years old, right? There are cave paintings of this same sort of, and then they're all over the world too. What did you say that they're in South America? They're called Pachamama or whatever. Like the big, enormously fat female figures wearing a pleated skirt. It's the same everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they're naked, sometimes they have on this pleated skirt or whatever. It's sometimes they're reclining, you know. So there's this famous one from Malta where she's like on one elbow and she's on her side. And she's got this enormous belly, and then you know.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, the closer you get to modern times, the more often you will see massive architectural undertakings that are dedicated to
something that's
some tradition that's thousands of years old, right? But if you go back, it's like they look at that sort of modern iteration, and then they assume that when you go back 5,000 years ago and there's this massive structure, oh well, that was also this type of thing.
Yeah.
Well, where's the thousands of years of tradition before that led up to the requirement to build this thing?
Yeah.
I guess what I'm suggesting is that I think that these oldest structures, like we talk about the Temple of Jupiter or whatever, is built on top of Baalbek.
Right.
It's the same type of thing. Like the Temple of Jupiter was built there most likely because of the great antiquity of the base of the foundation.
Yeah.
And we look at all of this stuff in Egypt in the same way. It's like there's all this stuff in Egypt with all of this religious, whatever, quote-unquote religious looking stuff going on and all of this. But then you have the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. You don't have any of that.
There's nothing on it.
No carvings and no writing and that. You know, it's like, so once again you have this problem of like the original massive structures, which so many legends say built by the gods or built by giants or whatever. They are the thing that created the religious tradition that carried on for that. So it's like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like when you go back so far, the way I look at it now is you can't immediately assume temple just because it reminds you of some massive stone structure that was built to a culture that had thousands of years to develop. Right.
Stand
Those
down
are modern
or die.
things. Yeah. And the reason why those modern things exist is because of those thousands of years. They were built on these incredibly ancient structures that were found by these people.
Like in other words,
yeah.
Like if these gigantic stone structures, which have been found since antiquity by people all over the world, have been quants-upped into places of worship and some kind of maybe. Yeah.
Or it's kind of like what you say about using the Egyptian culture as an example. That whole culture sprang up because of the Sphinx and the pyramids.
Yeah.
The Great Pyramids.
Right. Now we call them that's our
exactly, because they started building temples, quote-unquote temples, to dedicate to those, whoever it was, the gods or whoever built
the Assyrian civilization or whatever.
Yeah. So let's take the Colosseum, for example. The Colosseum was not built dedicated to any god. It was like, hey, let's party. But you can imagine...
Let's watch lions eat people.
You can imagine that if in 1,000 years, when we've sort of lost all of this current set of knowledge, after a cataclysm, new cultures, and they're discovering stuff, and they find this thing, that they might, like, there's ruins all over Rome, but there's this massive parts of the Colosseum still standing, that they might start building structures dedicated to the gods that built that thing.
Right.
And then later, thousands of years after that, we've got this whole lineage of people building structures dedicated to the gods of these ancient whatever.
Right.
That came from the original discovery of the structures. It's like, how could this have possibly been done by man? It was gods.
Imagine the religious structures that are going to be built 10,000 years from now, dedicated to like Crazy Horse and Mount Rushmore, right? There are going to be temples all around those mountains.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So like when you come upon a place like Malta, and this happens everywhere. We talk about it all the time. I don't know therefore temple. No, that's the need. Yeah. Or tomb. Yeah. Temple or tomb. I don't know therefore tomb. I don't know therefore temple. That's what the archaeologists do. It's like they immediately go into, oh well, this is the result of religious practices.
Right.
And
it can't be scientific.
Stand down or
can't
die.
Be economic.
Right.
It's purely religion and control. That's what they talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
And really, the most modern iteration of that type of thing
I cannot
is
do that.
the cathedral building. Right? And that was a very specific thing that was most definitely dedicated to the preservation of these ancient texts that were collected all over the place. Now they're looked at today as, they were built for religious purposes. But I don't look at them like that.
Right.
I look at them like this thing was built to preserve what was written on paper and is being copied. And of course, that cathedral houses a library of all these texts that were copied.
Yeah.
It's written in the very stone of the building. You know,
a lot of times they were commissioned by what was the ruling people at the time, which in some cases were religious people, right? So like you have, since the government is basically a religion at the same time, they're the ones commissioning these works, but these guys who came to build them were building them in the context of like, okay, this is a temple, but they're preserving all this ancient knowledge at the same time.
it's good point. Yeah.
All right, we got to take a break. We will come back to the final segment. Finish up the show. Talk about this weird Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Let me try that again. Sometimes I totally flub the name. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, talking about the mysteries of Malta. And we just found this. I just want to read this real quick because it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. Our good friend and Snake Bro, Booker Davenport, who passed away recently. He is the most recent one to leave us a review and a comment on our iTunes podcast page. And he says, it's by Arrowheads and Prints, 5 stars by El Bucarino. Favorite yet. Remember getting flooded in out at the ranch? You were right. I am hooked on artifacts. Call me. Booker, you're an awesome dude. So, I want to go back on this point that you were talking about the, where are the precursors to this stuff? Like, how do you, this kind of mystery sort of is all around the world, right? These people just show up, build all kinds of anomalous stuff, and then disappear. Is that kind of like what you were talking about? And then they try to say, oh, these were temples, or this was a tomb, or whatever, and you're like, well, where are the practice tries? They just showed up and they suddenly could build these awesome temples.
Yeah, there's multiple ways to get pissed about the way they handle it. They like with Göbekli Tepe, they do this thing. Oh, well, we know there are practice tries somewhere, so we're gonna dig up this other one. Oh, wait, this one's even bigger.
Yeah, and better and older.
Better. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that, but even with Göbekli Tepe, there's like, oh, well, this was a place of worship, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
No evidence anybody lived here, so it must be
right, and it's easy for us now to say when we find some massive stone structure to say that was a place of worship, because we look at other massive stone structures and we see that people worship there.
Yeah.
And they still do to today.
Yeah.
And then we look back at the Romans and we see that they built massive temples out of stone to quote unquote worship. But every single one of these more recent constructions of these massive stone quote unquote temples where we actually have contextual data about the society and about their culture and their religion and their practices.
Like a European cathedral thing.
Yeah, we have data that says, well, that's what they did. But that doesn't explain the further you go back, and they're trying to say we started out with butt flaps, and then suddenly we started doing agriculture and megalithic architecture. The moment we go into megalithic architecture, they're like, oh, well, it's obviously religious, because the most recent iterations of megalithic architecture are religious.
Okay.
Dedications.
Yeah.
And my suggestion is that they're not looking at the bigger picture, seeing that the reason why these religions exist to begin with is because of these extremely old traditions that were like basically if we follow those back, they end at already existing megalithic architecture.
Yeah.
And so it's like what we always say is that, like, well, this culture, if we're talking about sort of the Graham Hancock idea that there was a civilization that existed prior to the end of the last ice age, that had technology to build all these things, and they had utility in what they were doing, like we do when we build the power plants.
Yeah.
Where we're massive stone constructions.
Yeah.
They find these places as hunter-gatherers, where they can't even imagine, after losing the knowledge, that this could even be done by men.
Right.
And so they build mastabas and stuff and try to emulate the quote-unquote gods. And we call them gods now. And this is another thing. If you wipe the slate clean, definition
down or die.
Lowercase g god. You imagine, like, let's say that's just what the people call it. And their meaning for that word was like what we say. We're Americans.
Yeah.
We're Americans.
Yeah, we come from God.
Yeah, we're from the land of God. You see what I'm saying? Like, if you wipe that
We're on a mission from God.
Yeah. So it's
I
like,
cannot
oh,
do
okay,
that.
well, they were the gods, and they built this. It's basically what these hunter-gatherer people are saying. Or perhaps they did believe it was some, all-powerful being, and they didn't think it was human that did it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, imagine being, a primitive, or even like just a, not necessarily primitive, but like you're in a post-cataclysmic state. Let's say it's been 1,000 years, maybe 500 years after the cataclysm or so. You come to a little group of people and you're moving around, keep trying to find fresh water and game, stay on top of it or whatever. And then you're in this canyon, and then you come across the half-buried
do that.
remnants of some hydroelectric dam. That just fills the freaking canyon, but half of it's covered in collapsed stone.
Right.
And you just see these enormous constructions
down
sticking out,
or
and maybe there's
die.
remnants of the enormous ceramic, all the weird electrical stuff sticking out of it with no wires left. It's just these crazy towers and things sticking out of it, and a lot of it's crumbled down. And maybe you find your way into part of it, and there's just an enormous three-dimensional warren of tunnels underneath there with all kinds of stuff you can't understand, and signs with pictures of people doing things. Half of it's filled with mud. Like that would probably blow your mind. Right. You had completely forgotten all this stuff, but you would have these legends that you had been carrying along about the gods, about the
ones
down
who came
or die.
first.
right, who were able to do all this crazy stuff, and here you found one of their places clearly.
And that's what I'm saying. You can replace that word. Like they had, they had the powers of the gods, right? Or in the story you're telling, those people could be saying they had the tech of the Americans.
Right.
And so tech becomes synonymous with magic, and Americans become synonymous with gods.
Right.
Thousands of years later, after they tried to excavate the dam and they built all this other stuff and they plastered over the surface and carved all this
all
stuff
over it, yeah.
and they built small imitations of it.
Yeah.
And then later cultures, like as they start to learn from the construction of this dam, they start doing better and better stuff.
Yeah.
And you can see later that, okay, well, this culture developed, and they got better and better and better, and then they started damming up the river and all this kind of stuff. But there's this really ancient
I
dam
cannot do
that
that.
was attributed to this one king. Well, he just went back and restored it. It's the same story we've gone over with Egypt and the pyramids, all of those things. But it just occurred to me that to assume, like, say, an archaeologist or whatever, whoever's studying this site in Malta, for them to assume temple, if they really think about what a temple is, even the more modern iterations of temples, like it requires thousands of years of legend and protecting and passing on oral tradition and all this kind of stuff over and over, and it's that's, in other words, what I'm saying is that is more far-fetched than it is the requirement of a technologically advanced society. Right. Because that only takes a couple of hundred years to going to the moon. Right. So,
Or if there's influence from somewhere else, right? Like Patrick, our friend Patrick Snakebro was pointing this out about Japan, right? This thing that happens with Japan when it was like they suddenly opened the ports. Like Japan had been isolated for hundreds of years, and they had like developed all this beautiful artwork and all this kind of stuff, but technologically they had sort of stayed the same. Right. And then all of a sudden the ports opened 50 years later. Right. They're just incredibly advanced, right? Because there was an influence. So like that kind of thing, I thought that was a brilliant, point to make. Like we talked about this, like we have examples in modern times, right, of a culture that isn't primitive at all, but is not as advanced technologically speaking,
Right.
And then a technologically more advanced culture shows up, says, hey, we're going to start trading with you, whatever, and then 50 years later, Japan has practically matched the technological development. And in 50 years, they went from like, what the equivalent would have been of a medieval culture. 50 years later, they're 19th century, right?
Right. So it's perfectly making the point that to suggest something is a temple requires way more prior advancement in terms of time
Yeah.
than technological advancement.
Right.
Which can happen very quickly. Yeah,
Yeah.
technological development, which can happen quickly. So, we know that it only took, a couple of guys like Tesla and Edison
Yeah.
in the same vicinity, working alongside each other, looking at studying each other's work to develop this massive electrical system that's still running everything that we know today, right?
Yeah.
And those two guys were like these pioneers. Like before them, there was just not much advancement in that at all.
People were experimenting with it, but it was a kind of an elite toy.
So these two guys like started inventing stuff, and then that just completely redraws the whole surface, of the planet
Yeah.
in this new type of technology.
Yeah.
That's, they've poured massive slabs and built these huge power grids, and the ceramics and certain elements of those things will remain for thousands of years. What do you think people are going to think if there's a huge house for them to all the stuff inside
Mud, and then later it erodes away. There's going to be just lines of petrified wooden poles knocked down or whatever, and they're all the same length, and they're all basically the same size, and just lines of them for thousands of miles going all over the place.
Yeah.
Same kind of wood, same size, basically just all over the world, right?
Yeah, and there will be areas where they're just following one line.
Yeah.
And then eventually it'll come to an area and there's just thousands of lines going in all over. You're like, what? That was
Yeah.
a neighborhood.
Stand down.
Right.
A city or whatever.
This was like a religious path, right?
Yeah.
They walk these paths and they line them with blocks.
That's what I'm saying. It's hard to really break this out of our current situation, because the way I look at our current situation is that all these religions, all of the current religions of the day, and all of the current technology of the day is based on ancient discoveries. Because we have had, according to our own model, at least 6,000 years of pretty well-defined path,
Yeah.
right, of human advancement.
Stand down or die.
Now, the fact that there's
I cannot do
darkness
that.
beyond that, and then 6,000 years before that,
Yeah. It's like, and then 10,000 years that before that sparks of twinning.
obviously we're missing some pieces of the puzzle. But if you say try to what is it, the two things, isolationism and diffusion? Yeah, diffusionism. Isolationism and diffusion. So if you imagine this perfectly isolationism world, I don't believe that you can have any of the things that we have today.
Right.
You
It
can't
has
have
to
that.
diffuse, yeah.
Right. And we know, like we've talked about Columbus sailing, in 1492 or whatever,
I cannot
1493.
do that.
And he had maps.
Right, that's why he went. and
Cannot
some
do
relics
that.
from ancient Egypt and whatnot. So it's like you can't really separate what we have today from these ancient cultures in the past, because it has been, even though there have been dark ages, there have been things that have been preserved, right?
Yeah.
And religions are largely based on this art and of how to preserve knowledge of the past.
Yeah.
And so to imagine this perfectly isolationist society that develops it, and even if it was the first, like there has to have been the first advanced culture.
Yeah.
And if we had archaeological evidence of this the first advanced culture, which I don't think Göbekli Tepe is,
No.
we most likely could see, if there was a good enough preservation of their development, we would be able to see that path of their discovery and development of these things. So the mastabas become pyramids and so on and so forth.
Okay. Well, I mean, like, today we build things in the middle of nowhere that are incredibly advanced, right? So, like, like the same hydroelectric dam. You go out in the middle of the desert. Hoover Dam, for example. It's in the middle of the mountains. There's not really stuff around it except a road. So you might find that site perfectly preserved or partially preserved, but everything else is gone. or underneath a whole bunch of stuff.
I agree with you because you're talking about a society that's already advanced enough to build the dam.
Okay, yeah. I'm just saying that, like, I agree with you too.
Finding the dam doesn't necessarily mean you'll find the development of the dam, right?
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I agree. But what I'm saying is there could be an example of the beginning of this isolationist society where you can see they were building grass huts and whatever, and then somebody invented something, and you might find that. There are some small examples
Oh, yes.
of that type of development. Right?
Yeah.
Like we have certain examples of the technology from the atlatl to the bow and arrow.
Yeah.
Right. We see how that develops and whatnot. So that really is an idealistic idea that you could find the first civilization.
Yeah, and the beginning of it.
As well. Like you're not just gonna find the quote unquote temple that they built.
Right.
Right, you're not going to find the Hoover Dam first. No, that is what you're going to find first.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So it's
you find the final most awesome advancement things they built because those are what last the longest.
Those are what last.
In some cases, like
you find the artifacts, like the stone tools.
Yeah.
Right, which are obviously primitive.
Yeah.
That doesn't. You might.
I cannot do
digging
that.
in tons of different spots, see somewhat a development.
Yeah.
But still, it's very localized.
Yes. I think the trade is a big deal with development. Like, think of what happened with Europe and the Silk Road, and just the connecting of the East and West and the Old World. Right. So the watch was pointing out, he says the more our world becomes connected, the faster our advancement accelerates. The advent of the internet is a prime example, right? So think of the Silk Road as the very beginning, like an example of the beginning of the internet, right? We're connecting a vastly separated part of the world together. And the bits of data that are going back and forth are trading caravans, right? So a trading caravan goes from Europe to China, sells a bunch of weird European stuff to Chinese people and picks up a bunch of weird Chinese stuff and brings it back, right? And so these people are exchanging things here, right? So you got some guy in China looking at some strange European clockwork, and then, and then in Europe you got some dude taking apart some Chinese firecrackers, right? On both sides there are going to be people that buy the little trinkets and then take them apart to see what they're doing. You know what I'm saying? And then that expands advancement. The Chinese were badass with clockwork too, don't get me wrong. I'm just giving an example, like going back and forth. There's diffusionism, right? The Silk Road caused advancement on both ends because of the trade.
Right.
And then it also caused advancement in all kinds of other things in terms of like transportation and like how do we get these, the logistics of getting this stuff together, and then how do we get it across in like, vehicles and everything like that. Building the road, there's all kinds of interesting stuff happening there, and eventually you get to this like massive connectedness that we have today. And we can exchange ideas at the rate of the speed of light through our close to it, through our network. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I can look at your little clockwork trinket from the other side of the world on my computer without having to like wait for a caravan to take 8 months to get here.
Yeah.
And like we can look at this idea I've got. And then you can be able to be like, oh yeah, so that was cool, but let's try it. Like, oh yeah, let's leave it there. And go back and forth, which is what happens very slowly with caravans. Right. So, and then of course, there's also the interesting thing of the development of the post. The passing of messages. Just purely carrying a message from one place to another. You just look at the development of mail, right? I think that stuff is fascinating. Or even the development of the ability to transfer money from one place to another. If you're going to go on a big, in the Middle Ages, you're going to go on a sort of a caravan travel across Europe. You don't want to carry, 100,000 pounds in gold in your cart because it's so easy to rob you, right? So you can go to a Templar bank, a Templar temple, quote unquote, and they would just give you a written script. You would deposit your gold there with their bank, and they give you a written script, and you can take it to any other Templar place in any other city and give them that script and they give you your gold.
Yeah.
Right?
I must
So that
massive
free.
technological advancement.
Right. So that kind of stuff is all fascinating to me, like the development of money, the movement of materials.
But still, see, this is what I'm trying to do is look at this. Try to come up with what would be the development of the very first culture.
I cannot be contained.
No, I don't. I don't either. But that's the part that it's trying to work on that gives me the idea when I compare to everything that we're studying now in terms of our ancient past and the idea of how so many of these things are all attributed to religious practices or like some mythological idea that this culture developed. And I'm gonna tease something a little bit here. Bernie Taylor.
Yeah.
He's writing a book or wrote a book. It's about to be published called Before Orion, and it is very much focused on the paintings in the Chauvet Cave and all this ridiculously old cave paintings.
Right.
And I don't want to take too much away, go into the book so much because we're gonna do that later. It's a badass idea of this development of technology, like the fact that you could record ideas in symbols.
Yeah.
Right. This is
that is a big technological step.
Major technological step, and in a place like you eventually discover a place where you can do it, where it's going to stay, and you build this whole quote unquote shamanic or priest-like custom about it, but it is not religious. Like this idea of religion, I guess what I'm trying to steer away from is this idea of a practice of beliefs, so to speak, versus a practice of recording the thoughts of man or the ideas of man.
Yeah.
Right? Those two things are very different.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
One is the preservation of older stuff that we're trying to interpret.
Yeah.
Right. This is our modern iteration of religion. Like we're looking at these ancient texts and we're trying to interpret them, and we're thinking, oh, well, this is, these were wise people, or they were inspired by God, the Creator.
Yeah.
Etc. And so they're trying to tell us something, and it's very important.
Or they had some kind of spiritual enlightenment or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This could have simply been like, hey, I can make the symbol of the bull that we hunt.
Yeah.
Right? And here it is. And I can make symbols that represent the stars that we see today.
Yeah.
And I can record the process of our culture or our tribe or what we're doing on this cave wall, and then I can teach you how to read the symbols and interpret the symbols as I've written them down.
Yeah.
And like if we were Snake Bros in the cave, it's like, oh dude, look, I just made this thing, and it's the big hunt that just happened, and it's how we reach success.
Yeah.
Right? It was all these guys, and they surrounded the bull in this way, and this is how we got it, and that's how we succeeded, and bam. It's like I'm recording this aspect of our success and survival, and then we teach that to the younger people and so on and so forth, and like that's how this civilization begins, of like, oh, if we record our knowledge, it's easier for us to not be just like animals that just have a short period of learning from the instincts or the ideas immediately from the other person, but we can continue to learn from people further and further back.
Right.
So it becomes a practice.
And then it also sort of starts to shape brains into the ability of abstract thinking.
Exactly.
Like I'm looking at these like random, like any animal would see them as random shapes, basically. They're just like black marks on the wall.
Right.
But I'm like, oh, that's a guy, and that's another guy, and they've got spears, and that's the bull.
Right.
Right. And so you begin to like shape this sort of abstract thinking that eventually becomes symbols for words and so on and so forth. I see what you mean.
And if I can build this thing with these paints, I could also build something with stone, because I'm in a cave and I know that it's been preserved for 4 or 5 generations where I know my great-great-great-great-grandfather started this cave. Like, I could build a cave out there.
Yeah.
Because we have to move.
Like the cave that the Vikings built.
So we move to these plains, and there's some stones over here. It's like, well, I'm going to stack them up and cover it.
Yeah.
And then paint it all on the inside.
Yeah.
Everything that I can remember.
Right. That's cool.
And so you start to build these things, and it's like later they're found, like way later when they become awesome and they're huge and whatever, and they're recording all this stuff inside them. There's all this recorded stuff. And we find them, it's like, oh, this is a temple dedicated to the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no. This was a library, and it's always been about the internet and libraries.
Right.
Everything.
Yeah.
And it's only, it's like, then we lose it all, and then the few remaining people who survive the cataclysm are walking along, trying to struggle to survive, and they find the cave.
And they're like, oh, that's what it is.
Yeah, they find the building.
Let's try that.
They find the building, and it's like, man, they did this, and they preserved this, and holy smokes.
Or even if they just find a cave to hide in, and it's a painting, they're like, oh, look, that's how they hunted a bull back in the day.
Right, exactly.
Maybe we can try this and get some food. Yeah.
So cool. it's like we've gone through these cataclysms, we've gone through these dark ages, and we've reemerged, and we've rediscovered this is what I'm saying. We are so many times over from the real development of the first that we no longer have the context to even look at an ancient structure and say, well, what could it have been? It's like, oh, well, this is obviously a temple because all of them are temples.
Right.
Because all of them are based on religious practices, and religion is mythological and et cetera, et cetera.
Right. That's good, man. That was a good rant. That was fantastic. I didn't have to do anything.
Stand down or die.
Oh, that was really great. See, guys, this is why he is my co-host. I go on rants like that, but that was a fantastic. That was a freaking class A rant right there.
Malta meal. Because you gotta keep eating while you're wearing your butt flap, standing up giant stones on a fucking pyre in the middle of the fucking ocean.
All right, that was the show for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com.
Sorry about that. You can visit the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. Comment there. Check out the encyclopedia and the glossary.
That's right. And check us out on Twitter. Twitter's going strong, guys. At SNKBRS. Snake Bros with no vowels.
And make sure to share the shows.
That's right. And don't forget to donate to our pyramid scheme. Send us $1.
Or $3.14.
That's right. We'll accept 3.14 or even
3.14 Bitcoin.
1.08. That's right. And don't forget to give us reviews on any medium you can give us reviews on. And also, we have this is awesome. We have not ever put our shows on YouTube. We do have a Brothers of the Serpent YouTube channel, but all of it is like, okay, there's two things there. A bunch of videos that I put up there a long time ago that are just goofy stuff that I did personally, not connected to Snake Bros. And then there's all my old Snake Bros research. I've got these giant playlists of videos about Snake Bros stuff in there. Other people's videos, right?
That's cool.
A lot of them are probably gone now because stuff gets removed. But we have this dude that we met through Twitter. His name is Brandon Ricks. His Twitter handle is @HistoryShift. He has a YouTube channel. Go check it out. I just did the narration for a short video he made on the recat structure and the fact that it's probably not Atlantis. It was a pretty good video. I volunteered to do the narration for him for it, and we did that together, and he posted it. He has volunteered to start putting our podcasts together with slideshows of pertinent images for us. Like, this is a thing that we've known we needed to do, but yeah, it's an enormous job and we haven't done it. We procrastinated or whatever. And he's like, dude, I'll totally do it. He's just sent me the first draft of episode 80, which is the one I recommended he start with because I've got a bunch of pictures already up on the website. So this guy is awesome. He's going to be putting up our shows or giving them to me so I can upload them. So we want you guys to go check out his channel, check out his stuff, and follow him on Twitter. So @HistoryShift. Thank you so much, bro. We really appreciate it. Wanted to give you a shout out for that. So
thanks a lot.
That's right. Good night, Adamu. Get back to work.